The air was thick, heavy with mist as I trudged through the mud-soaked path, my boots squelching loudly with each step. It was just past sunset, the twilight barely holding the darkness at bay, and the woods around me seemed to close in with an almost palpable intensity. I had always loved the forest, its serene beauty, and the whispering of the leaves. But tonight, everything felt different, as if the woods themselves were watching me. I was alone, or so I thought, walking to clear my mind, but with each step, the isolation weighed heavier upon me. My breath misted in the air, mingling with the fog that seemed to swirl more thickly as the light faded. The path, familiar in the daylight, now seemed a stranger to me, twisting and turning in ways I didn't remember. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, carrying whispers that didn't sound quite human. Suddenly, a crack of a twig snapped sharply to my left. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, straining my ears for any sound in the unnerving silence that followed. It was just a deer, I told myself, or some small creature. The forest is full of life, after all. Yet, as I started walking again, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The whispers seemed to call my name, faint and distorted, like a cruel mimicry of a friend's voice. I should have turned back, but my feet carried me deeper into the woods. The darkness gathered around me as the last of the twilight died, and I flicked on my flashlight, its beam a small, shaky circle of light that seemed to struggle against the overwhelming blackness. The trees cast long, gnarled shadows that twisted and shifted as the light moved over them. They looked like they were reaching for me, branches like fingers, sharp and threatening. The path ended abruptly, opening into a small clearing that I didn't recognize. Confusion gripped me. I had walked this forest hundreds of times, and yet this place was unfamiliar. My skin prickled with goosebumps, a cold dread settling in my stomach. The air was still here, unnaturally so, the usual sounds of nighttime creatures eerily absent. In the center of the clearing stood an old, twisted tree, its bark blackened as if burnt by fire. I approached the tree, drawn by a morbid curiosity, my flashlight flickering as I got closer. That's when I saw it. Carved into the tree was a face, eyes hollow and mouth agape in a silent scream. My breath caught in my throat, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Then, the flashlight went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for it, my fingers trembling as I tried to turn it back on, but it was dead. Panic rose in me, quick and choking, and I stumbled back from the tree. That's when the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were right behind me now, so close I could almost feel their breath on my neck. I spun around, but there was nothing, only the oppressive, tangible darkness. I started to run, not knowing where I was going, only that I needed to get away. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees now looming figures that blocked my path, their branches grabbing at my clothes like hands desperate to hold me back. I pushed through, the scratches of the twigs sharp against my skin, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. I could hear something chasing me, footsteps that were too heavy, too loud to be human, crashing through the underbrush. Just when I thought I couldn't run any longer, I broke through the tree line and found myself back on the path. Relief flooded through me, short-lived, as I realized I was not alone. Ahead of me, in the middle of the path, stood a figure. It was shrouded in darkness, its features obscured, but it was unmistakably human, or so it seemed. My heart skipped a beat as it moved towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I couldn't move, frozen in place by fear, as it came closer. When it stepped into a beam of moonlight that filtered through the trees, I saw its face, or what should have been a face. It was blank, devoid of any features, like a smooth piece of clay molded into the shape of a head. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. It reached out to me, its hand stretching forward, fingers elongated and twisted into horrifying shapes. Just as its fingers were about to touch me, I woke up. I was in my bed, drenched in sweat, the remnants of the dream fading as reality set in. It was just a nightmare, I told myself, trying to calm my racing heart. But as I lay there, trying to return to sleep, a cold breeze brushed against my face, like a whisper from the forest. The window was open, but I didn't remember opening it. Lying there, my heart still thudding in my chest, the darkness of the room seemed to creep closer, the shadows lengthening and twisting into sinister shapes. I told myself it was just the after effects of the nightmare, but the unease lingered, clawing at the edges of my mind. The wind outside picked up, howling like the cries of the lost, the rain tapping against the window like desperate fingers. It was supposed to be a stormy night, but this felt different, as if the storm itself bore malice. I tried to close the window, but it wouldn't budge, stuck as though held by unseen hands. The room grew colder, the air thick with a tension that made it hard to breathe. I could feel something watching me, its gaze heavy and oppressive. Turning around, I scanned the darkness, my eyes trying to pierce the blackness that seemed to swallow the light. Then I saw it, a faint outline in the corner of the room, a darker patch of shadow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I reached for the lamp beside my bed, my fingers trembling. The light flickered on, struggling against the overwhelming gloom. The shadow in the corner moved, its form shifting, growing taller. A whisper floated through the room, a voice so cold it made my skin crawl. "You cannot leave," it hissed, the words slithering through the air. I recoiled, pulling the covers tighter around me as if they could protect me from what lurked just beyond the light. The shadow stretched across the wall, its form distorted and twisted. It resembled a human, but its proportions were all wrong, limbs too long and angles too sharp. The face, if it could be called that, was a mere smudge, yet I felt its eyes on me, cold and calculating. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The shadow paused, then, with a movement that seemed to mock the very nature of physics, it leaned closer. "I am your fear," it replied, the voice echoing around the room. Suddenly, the lamp went out, plunging the room back into darkness. I could hear my own breath, ragged and quick, and the pounding of my heart seemed deafening in the silence that followed. The shadow whispered again, closer this time, so close I could almost feel its touch. "You invited me in," it said, a statement that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't understand. Hadn't I just closed my eyes and fallen asleep? But then I remembered the open window, the one I didn't remember opening. I needed to get out, to escape this nightmare that had followed me into the waking world. I threw off the covers and sprinted to the door, my hands grasping for the knob. It turned, but the door wouldn't open, stuck as firmly as the window. Desperation clawed at my throat as I pulled and yanked, the shadow's laughter filling the room, a sound devoid of humor and full of malice. Turning back to the room, I saw the shadow looming larger, its form enveloping the far wall completely. "There is no escape," it murmured, and the walls seemed to pulse in agreement. The air grew colder, so cold it burned, and I backed away, stumbling over a chair. The floor seemed to tilt, disorienting me further, and for a moment I wondered if I was still dreaming. I wasn't sure what to do, trapped in my own room with something that seemed born of the deepest, darkest part of the night. The shadow moved again, its form flowing like liquid, and it whispered one word: "Look." Compelled by a force I couldn't resist, I turned to the mirror on the wall. What I saw made my blood run cold. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't me. The eyes were hollow, deep pits of darkness, and the mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. I reached up to touch my face, but my reflection didn't mimic my movements. Instead, it tilted its head, watching me with those empty eyes. The room spun, and I felt a scream building in my throat, but no sound came out. The shadow's whisper filled the room, echoing off the walls, "You are mine now." My knees buckled, and I hit the floor, the impact jarring, but doing nothing to dispel the nightmare around me. The darkness seemed to close in, suffocating, and the last thing I saw before my vision faded was the shadow bending over me, its form blurring the edges of my fading consciousness. Consciousness flickered back to me like a dim light in a storm, each moment pulsing with a dread I couldn't escape. I lay there, on the cold floor, the shadow's whispers still echoing in my ears. The darkness had consumed everything, leaving only fragments of my own fear as a guide. I struggled to rise, my body heavy and resistant, as if the shadow's presence sought to pin me to the ground forever. Its laughter, a distorted cacophony, filled the room again, wrapping around me like chains. "Still trying to escape?" the shadow taunted, its voice a chilling blend of amusement and threat. I pushed myself to my knees, refusing to surrender to the despair it wanted me to feel. The room had grown colder still, the air thick with an unseen menace. "You belong to this darkness now," it hissed, moving closer so that I could feel the unnatural cold emanating from it. Its form hovered over me, a mass of swirling, dark mist, and I knew I had to find some strength left to resist. Desperate, I searched the room with my eyes, looking for any light, any beacon that might dispel the darkness. My gaze fell on the window, still stubbornly open against the battering rain. The storm outside mirrored the chaos within, the lightning flashing like the neurons firing in my brain, trying to piece together a way out. "You think the storm will save you?" the shadow sneered, reading my thoughts as easily as one reads a book. "It is my ally," it declared with a dark chuckle that sent waves of fear through my already trembling body. I turned my focus back to the window, the rain beating down in sheets. If I could just reach it, feel the natural air, maybe I could weaken the hold this creature had over me. Crawling, each movement a battle against the force that tried to keep me down, I made slow, agonizing progress. The shadow loomed over me, never touching, but always pressing its cold presence close enough to remind me of my peril. "Where will you go?" it whispered, a sound so close it could have been a lover's breath. "All paths lead back to me." But its words only fueled my determination. I had to escape, had to find a way back to the world I knew, the one where such darkness was just a nightmare and not a living, breathing entity. Reaching the window, I pulled myself up, using the wall for support. The rain hit my face, sharp and real, its natural force a contrast to the supernatural chill of the room. I leaned out, letting the storm's energy wash over me, dilute the shadow's power. It screamed in anger, a sound that shook the very foundation of my house. "You cannot break free," it roared, but I saw it, the way the room brightened just a fraction, the shadow recoiling as the real, turbulent air disturbed its form. Emboldened, I shouted back, my voice raw, "I am not yours to claim." The battle of wills intensified, the storm outside raging as fiercely as the one inside. I clung to the window, the rain soaking me, grounding me with its persistent reality. The shadow swirled around the room, its form less certain, the edges of its darkness fraying. "I will not be dismissed," it warned, its voice now laced with an uncertainty that had not been there before. "I am not a part of your darkness." I yelled, feeling the strength of my own spirit bolstered by the storm's wildness. The shadow paused, and in that hesitation, I felt a shift. It was as if the room itself breathed a sigh, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. The creature's form flickered, unstable, and I pressed my advantage, pushing further into the rain-soaked night. "You cannot hold me here," I declared, my voice stronger now, my fear turning into defiance. The shadow's form twisted violently, a silent scream of rage that vibrated through the air. "You are nothing without your fear," it spat out, a last desperate attempt to regain control. But the storm had reawakened something in me, a resilience that the shadow couldn't touch. As the night wore on, the battle continued, each flash of lightning a symbol of my fight, each thunderclap a defiance of the darkness that sought to bind me. I held onto the window, the lifeline to a world where such shadows could be overcome. The rain washed away the last of my hesitation, and I knew that this night would not end with me succumbing to the darkness. The storm outside was my ally, and I would use its power to keep pushing, to keep fighting. The shadow wavered, its form less cohesive, the room gradually brightening as my resolve weakened its hold. But the night was not over, and the creature before me, the faltering, was not yet defeated. I prepared for another assault, knowing that this confrontation was far from its conclusion. As the rain continued to fall, washing away the remnants of my fear, I braced myself for what was to come. The shadow gathered itself for another strike, and I stood ready, my heart steady, my spirit unbroken. The storm's wrath, a mirror to my own inner turmoil, intensified as the night deepened. Each thunderclap was a battle cry, each flash of lightning a weapon against the shadow that had sought to claim my soul. The rain poured, relentless and cleansing, washing away the remnants of the oppressive force that had choked the air moments before. My hands gripped the windowsill tighter, my resolve as unyielding as the storm itself. I would not falter now, not when victory seemed within reach. "You think you are winning," the shadow hissed, its form coalescing into a denser mass of darkness, "but you cannot destroy what you do not understand." Its words were meant to instill fear, to sow doubt, but they only steeled my resolve further. I had come too far, fought too hard to be swayed by its deceitful whispers. "I don't need to destroy you," I retorted, my voice steady despite the cold that tried to seep into my bones. "I just need to survive you." As if angered by my defiance, the shadow surged forward, a wave of darkness that threatened to engulf me. But the storm was my shield, the rain, my armor. The shadow recoiled as though burned each time it met the storm's touch, its form flickering and wavering like a flame in the wind. "You are alone, and you are weak," it taunted, trying to break my spirit as it found its physical attacks thwarted. "I am not alone," I shouted back, the realization dawning on me like the first light of dawn. The storm, the forest, the very earth itself stood with me. This was not just my fight. It was a battle for all those who had ever feared the dark, who had ever felt small and powerless. I drew strength from this unity, from the energy of the storm that raged around me. My fear, once a chain that bound me, now fueled my courage. The shadow, sensing its diminishing influence, grew desperate. It changed tactics, morphing into figures from my past, voices that whispered of regrets and failures. My heart clenched as I saw faces of loved ones, heard their voices calling me to surrender, to join them in the darkness. Tears blurred my vision, but the rain washed them away, strengthening my resolve. "These are just shadows of my own making," I declared, understanding at last the true nature of my foe. "You are nothing but my fear given form." With each declaration, the shadow shrank back, its form dissipating like smoke in the wind. I stepped forward, out of the protective embrace of the window and into the room that had once felt like a prison. The darkness retreated before me, a tide going out, leaving behind the stark, plain reality of my lonely room. The storm outside began to wane, its job done, its fury spent. As the first rays of dawn pierced the fading night, the shadow gave one last, pitiful scream before dissolving completely. The light washed over me, warm and cleansing, filling the room with a brilliance that made it hard to believe the darkness had ever been there. I turned back to the window, watching as the storm clouds broke apart to reveal a clear, blue sky. Exhausted but elated, I understood now that the shadow was never something external, something that could be fought with fists or weapons. It was born from within, from the dark corners of my own mind, fed by my fears and insecurities. Confronting it, surviving it, meant confronting myself. The battle was over, not because I had destroyed the shadow, but because I had accepted it as a part of me, no longer a force of control, but a reminder of my resilience. I left the window open, the room filled with fresh air and the promise of a new day. The forest outside, once a place of deep, dark fear, now seemed just a part of the world, a world I was once again ready to be part of. As I walked out of my room, stepping into the light of dawn, I knew the darkness might return someday, but I would be ready. Fear, once a formidable enemy, now lay behind me, a shadow dissolved by the light of understanding. The nightmare was over, and life, with all its light and shadows, awaited. I stepped forward, not in fear, but in acceptance, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the knowledge that I was no longer alone and never had been. The forest, the storm, and the dawn were with me, within me, and together we would meet the day.